We are talking about the Houthis here. They're the ones with their finger on the trigger. But that gun, the weapons here are being supplied by Iran.
Have you in your mind come up with an explanation of what the motive is?
To disenfranchise a certain demographic.
If the people who are in positions of power won't act in good faith and won't uphold their oath, the structure itself won't survive.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The United States Navy intervened after 3 commercial ships were attacked in the Red Sea. A U.S. naval destroyer shot down multiple drones that were launched from Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. Here is National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan addressing the incident.
3 vessels that are connected to 14 different nations, which goes to show you the extent to which this is truly a source of global concern and a threat to international peace and stability. We have every reason to believe that these attacks, while they were launched by the Houthis in Yemen, were fully enabled by Iran.
Nancy Cordis and Nicole Kilia join us now. Nancy is CBS News' chief White House correspondent. Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Nancy, let's begin with you. What's the latest from the White House on this attack?
Well, Bob, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, told us earlier today that the U.S. is now in talks with its partners in the region to try to determine whether it can set up some sort of maritime task force. This is something that is used in other dangerous parts of the world, essentially to offer these commercial ships safer harbor as they move through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea after what we saw over the weekend. He said that he has nothing to announce at this time, but that this is a growing concern after these 3 ships were fired on 4 times. Take a listen to what else he had to say about this incident.
The Houthis have threatened to attack any commercial ship in that region that has ties to Israel. You mentioned the fact that these ships had ties to 14 different countries. Did all of these ships have ties to Israel?
I can't answer that definitively, but we don't think so. We do not believe that all 3 of the ships had ties to Israel, and it goes to show you the level of recklessness that the Houthis are operating on. We are talking about the Houthis here. They're the ones with their finger on the trigger. But that gun, the weapons here, are being supplied by Iran. And Iran, we believe, is the ultimate party responsible.
And that's actually what makes all of this so challenging, because as the U.S. looks to respond to these incidents, it doesn't want to court a wider conflict, a conflict directly with Iran. And so far, that means, Bob, that the U.S. has not gone after the sites where these missiles and drones were launched this weekend.
And Nancy, turning to Ukraine, where is the White House on possible aid for that war-torn country?
Well, the budget director here at the White House, Shalanda Young, sent a pretty dire letter to the Speaker of the House today, warning him that the U.S. is essentially going to run out of all funds to help Ukraine fight this war by the end of the year. Obviously, we have known that this day was coming, but she really put a firm deadline on it and said that Congress cannot wait any longer. If it does, she argued, and those concerns were echoed by the National Security Advisor today, that Ukraine will be in danger of either losing some of the territory it has gained back or even potentially going into an economic tailspin. They say that U.S. aid is necessary. The U.S. has to provide it now. But of course, this has all gotten tangled up on Capitol Hill in this wider fight over border security. That's something that Republicans have been pushing for. And those talks have kind of been going in circles with no end in sight. So we're really getting close to the end of the year here, Bob, with no resolution.
A lot of urgency from the White House. But meanwhile, Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican, is speaking out about a possible impeachment of President Biden. Let's listen.
A formal impeachment inquiry vote on the floor will allow us to take it to the next necessary step. And I think it's something we have to do at this juncture.
Nicole, when you look at Speaker Johnson's remarks there on impeachment, he's talking about moving down that path while also contending with the issues of Ukraine and the issues of border talks and whether there could be a compromise there. In terms of what's most important to follow tonight, what are you looking at?
Well, I think just to piggyback off of Nancy, with respect to this supplemental funding, as she outlined, the White House really stressed the urgency of this situation in talking to a number of lawmakers who are supportive about providing additional aid, particularly to Ukraine. They are warning that they are running out of money and that time is of essence. But then you look at these border talks as congressional Republicans insist that the border has to be tied to some kind of Ukraine funding, and they appear to be faltering. We heard from Senator Lankford, who's been leading these talks, who over the weekend said they are making progress. But then just today on the Senate floor, you have Leader Schumer saying that Republicans are making extreme demands, for instance, on the issue of detention with respect to asylum seekers, and that they're really just too draconian to try to move forward. So that really begs the question, kind of where does this leave this supplemental aid that the White House is clamoring for? Because, of course, this was tied up in a bigger deal to provide funding not only for Ukraine and the border, but also for Israel and the Indo-Pacific. And now it appears it could be in jeopardy. Obviously, with respect to the impeachment inquiry, this is something that we saw Republicans bring up late last week. There is a desire to move forward with a formal vote to authorize an impeachment inquiry in the House, something we could see as soon as this week, possibly next week, certainly before the House breaks for the recess.
Nicole, if this new speaker moves down the path toward impeachment of President Biden, could that provide him with some sort of political cover with conservatives who would be angry if he moved forward with Ukraine funding?
Well, possibly. But look, part of this impeachment inquiry and the desire to move forward is because House Republicans contend that the White House is stonewalling them. Also, this does give them some political talking points as we move into the 2024 election cycle. And we have seen strong pushback from the White House continuing to try to debunk this inquiry. And what's interesting is just late last week, House Republicans emphasized that they did need more time with their inquiry. We had heard some rumblings that maybe things may be winding down, but obviously not necessarily the case. If they are potentially looking to formalize this vote, continue their line of investigation, politically speaking, will that give the speaker cover? Unclear, because as you know, this is a very tenuous conference, even more so with the exodus now of George Santos and now having a narrower majority.
And some Democrats tell me that they're uneasy about these border talks because they don't want to move to the center or the right on immigration policy just to get Ukraine money.
Yeah, it's really kind of like a game of Jenga, right? I mean, it's like you shift one piece and then you have another contingent that's not for this. And really, going back to the point I was making earlier about how this funding could be in jeopardy. I mean, again, we thought that these border talks and potentially, this could be posturing on the part of some Democrats in terms of backing away from the negotiations. Maybe, if the leader does move forward with some kind of vote on supplemental funding this week, maybe that forces Republicans' hands a little bit more. They can put more pressure on Republicans, but it really is a tenuous situation to try to find something that not only is palatable to Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats, but also House Republicans. And as you know, Bob, it's very hard to get agreement, not only among the chambers and the parties, but just, with these more specific conservative factions. So it's a very difficult position that I think Congress finds itself on a range of issues as we near the end of the year.
And Nancy, quickly, House Republicans might be pretty chaotic on some fronts, but they might be united on impeaching President Biden in the coming months. The White House often shrugs off this as something that they're not taking seriously, but it could be something that really weighs on the legislative schedule and their ability to have any kind of deal with Republicans. What's your latest reporting quickly on that?
Well, the White House continues to push back, Bob, to basically say there's no there, and that the facts just simply don't support an impeachment. And as long as there are even a handful of Republicans who have been saying that publicly as well, they feel pretty comfortable that this isn't going to go anywhere. Now, if push comes to shove and those Republicans who have said they don't see a lot of evidence actually have to take a vote and either side with their party or against it, then they could be in a very difficult situation. But for now, the White House continues to argue that they are doing the work of the American people, that they are focused on major issues of war and peace and the economy, and that what you're seeing on Capitol Hill surrounding impeachment is more of a sideshow.
Nancy Cordis and Nicole Kilia, thank you both so much. We appreciate it. According to a new court filing, former President Donald Trump will now appeal the ruling that reinstates the gag order imposed in his New York civil fraud trial. Trump's attorneys are seeking a, quote, urgent review of the order that the former president says violates his First Amendment rights. An appellate court reinstated the court ruling last week. It prohibits Trump and his attorneys from making public statements about the courtroom staff. And ahead of the 2024 election, a group of conservative activists are challenging the legitimacy of some voters across the United States. A CBS News investigation takes a look at the practice. Next, you're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A CBS News investigation dove into the ripple effects of new voter laws that allow individuals to challenge the legitimacy of an unlimited number of voters ahead of the 2024 election. Our Major Garrett spoke with challenge veteran James McWhorter and his accuser about the proceedings.
10 days after McWhorter learned his voter registration had been challenged, he defended his right to vote before the election board.
I paid taxes here for 20 years, even though I was homeless.
And for the first time faced Gail Lee.
For you to be able to challenge me, you have that right as a citizen of DeKalb County. But I served to give you that right. And it was hurtful that she would do something like that.
Have you, in your mind, come up with an explanation of what the motive is?
To disenfranchise a certain demographic. You're trying to put your foot on someone else's neck.
I mean, all he had to do was call up the office and give him his address. It's not exactly a heavy foot.
After the hearing, McWhorter, who is no longer homeless, updated his address to bring it into technical compliance. Gail Lee said the system worked.
Can you understand how people who are African American might feel this deeply, personally, in that your work feels threatening to them?
I would think they would want their vote protected too, because someone who doesn't belong on the rolls would take away their vote.
And Major Garrett joins us now in the studio with more on his latest investigation. Major, thanks for being here.
So great to be with you, Robert.
What's the significance of what you found?
So this is right now our story about Georgia. Georgia changed its law in 2021. It always had allowed citizens to challenge other people on the voter registration rolls. But in 2021, after the 2020 election, all the controversy and turmoil in Georgia, they said, well, we'll open this up. So any individual in Georgia can challenge an unlimited number of fellow Georgians on their voter registration status. You can challenge 1,000, 2,000 if you bring your information to the county board. What the county boards we talked to found is two things. They're being overwhelmed by these challenges now. They're having to investigate each and every one of them. Each requires a public hearing. That's point one. Point two, most of the things that are being flagged by these citizen detectives are administrative or technical errors. In James McWhorter's case, he was homeless, so he used the barbershop as his address so he could get a voter ID and a driver's license. We had to have both in Georgia to vote. But technically, you can't use a business address. Gail Lee, one of these citizen activists, challenged his voter status. He was able to fix it by giving his proper residential address now. So in his case, he didn't lose his vote. But you might under this process. And the true motivation for people like Gail Lee, who believe they're doing something that is helpful to the system and is perfectly legal, which it is they believe that they're going to find all this rampant systemic fraud in the system if they don't get involved and they don't check these addresses and these voter registrations. They're not finding systemic fraud, but they are on the hunt for it. And this will have effects on who's on the voter rolls and who may be able to cast a ballot in 2024.
What's been the response of civil rights advocates, the Justice Department, and others?
So they're concerned about this, but as I underscored, and this is really an important point, it's legal in Georgia. This is not an illegal process at all. It is perfectly legal. Now, there is a federal lawsuit that's been filed against this idea of one citizen being able to challenge any number of 1,000 or more voters. And a federal court may very well soon provide what Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger told us is necessary guidance. Really, is this consistent with federal law, and is it within the spirit of Georgia law? Until that happens, these unlimited challenges can continue. But there are concerns about the legality of this, and can one citizen basically spend time scouring voter rolls and suddenly cast doubt on the registration of thousands.
And in this country, as you know, you can't file baseless lawsuits if you don't have cause, or who even determines what cause is in these cases.
And because it's not a lawsuit, because it's just a challenge to a voter registration status, it falls in a kind of in-between area.
Is there a constitutional right to vote?
There is a constitutional right to vote. But if, in the case of James McWhorter, you're using a business address, not a residential address, technically you are in violation. So you need to fix that. And it can be fixed. It can be remedied. But James McWhorter said, wait a minute, what did I do wrong? I'm a registered voter. What happened? Well, you had an improper address. Fixable, but nevertheless, he had to take time off work, had to go to this public hearing, had to go through an entire process. He was thinking, maybe, do I need a lawyer? What do I need to do? It was fixable, but these things place stress on the system tremendously. Election officials are trying to prepare for the 2024 election, not sort through all these numerous challenges, all of which require their effort. They have to investigate things, plus hold these public hearings.
And suppose Georgia's close in 2024. And
it was in 2020.
It was. And suppose there are thousands of contested votes.
Let's put this in context. Our investigation showed since 2021, 81,000 challenges have been submitted statewide in Georgia. 15% have been accepted, meaning those names have been removed from the voter rolls. That's 12,000. Georgia was decided by 11,777 votes.
Where else on the map is this a possible issue, contesting someone's vote?
So there are conservative activists, again, all of whom believe Donald Trump won in 2020, or most of whom believe that, and believe that there's fraud in the system and things have to be fixed. None of that is systemically true. Challenging in battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, their efforts in California, Florida, other places that could or could not be close. It is a nationwide effort. And because state laws vary, what we did is we focused on what happens in Georgia, how the law was changed in Georgia, and what the effects are there.
Major Garrett, we appreciate your reporting.
Thank you
very much. Coming up, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. She's now sharing some of her grievances with the Republican Party. Her critiques are next. You're streaming America Decides.
The Speaker of the House is a collaborator to overthrow the last election.
Absolutely.
What happens if Mike Johnson's the Speaker on the 6th of January, 2025?
He can't be. You know, we're facing a situation with respect to the 2024 election where it's an existential crisis.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney discussing current House Speaker Mike Johnson and former President Donald Trump. She spoke with CBS's John Dickerson for a terrific sit-down interview on CBS Sunday Morning, where they discussed how Cheney's former Republican colleagues reacted following January 6. CBS News senior political analyst John Dickerson joins us now. He's also the host of Prime Time with John Dickerson. John, you ventured back to your alma mater, the University of Virginia, for this conversation with the former Congresswoman. Take us into that conversation, not just in terms of the politics of it, but the stakes she laid out for American democracy.
It's good to be with you, Bob. The stakes couldn't be higher as far as Liz Cheney is concerned. And this is not about the past, but the future. And she said, essentially, if Donald Trump is reelected, that will mean the end of the republic. She also said if there is an election and Republicans are in control in 2025, that might also mean the end of the republic, because she believes that if Speaker Johnson is still Speaker, or if there's another Republican in the Speaker's chair, that they will essentially do what Donald Trump wants them to do. And given that Donald Trump said that the election was stolen in 2012, 2016, 2020, he's likely to say it again, even if he was the victor. And so she thinks that that is also a threat to the republic. And I think she feels that the tide is not with her and the forces of democracy, and that the moment is perilous. And as she said, that America at the moment is sleepwalking into a dictatorship.
John, do you believe she's setting up for a possible independent presidential bid in 2024?
I don't know if it's in 2024. I asked her, and she said what you would expect, which is she's so focused on this question that she doesn't want to talk about anything else, which is exactly the thing you would want to say to put yourself in the proper political position, which is to stay focused on this issue, which she says is so important, but then also not really have to entertain any political questions. It's very clear that she has larger ambitions, but whether they are of 2024 or the future, I wasn't able to figure out.
What's your assessment of her view of the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and will any House Republicans listen to her criticism?
Her assessment of the Speaker could not be any lower. And she goes into great detail in this book about Mike Johnson, which when she wrote the book, and you know, Bob, about publishing deadlines, he was just a relatively obscure Louisiana congressman. He was not Speaker of the House. And she thought, in fact, that she'd kind of gone on a little too long about him. But the picture she wanted to paint was quite important because she felt that the sleight of hand he engaged in is the enabling sleight of hand that makes collaborators. And as she said, Donald Trump can't do it alone. So what she detailed was a case in which Mike Johnson was essentially asserting that Congress had powers it didn't have, asserting things about the election that were not true, and asserting things about the election that had been found to have no merit in a number of different court cases. And that in doing so, he was tricking his colleagues and basically saying all he was doing in filing an amicus brief in these court cases was backing up the president, President Trump at the time, backing up his ability to question the results. And there's nothing wrong with that. But Liz Cheney says he was doing a good deal more and being dishonest about it. And she basically uses that as an example case for what happens when Republicans become collaborators of a president who's lying about an election.
Collaborators, that's a word that has a loaded meaning in a sense in terms of history. And if you step back, not just from your role as interviewer and as presidential historian, John Dickerson, when you hear her talk about sleepwalking toward a dictatorship, and you hear Cheney and others worry about the rise of authoritarianism in the United States, possible fascist influence in the U.S. Government from the Republican Party, and then you hear from Republican critics of the former Congresswoman who say she's way over her skis in terms of using that sort of language and rhetoric. What are we to make of this all, this kind of battle over what the future is or could be inside the United States, especially in the GOP?
I think her argument is that if you look at what Donald Trump did in office, and particularly in that period between when he lost the election and January 6th, if you look at all the things he did, which you've covered so fully and which were a part of the January 6th committee, that it is impossible to come to any other conclusion than he thoroughly broke with his obligation to protect the Constitution. And so if you look at what he did do, and then what he has promised to do, including getting rid of the federal cases against him, pardoning those who were participants in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and a number of other things, going after political opponents, that if you take what he has done and what he has promised to do, that America has never seen a threat like that from a party nominee, and that if you take an oath, you have an affirmative job, in her view, to stand up and say, this is a threat to the center of democracy. And if you don't do that, then you're essentially helping Donald Trump. That's her argument.
Provocative interview. John Dickerson, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Programming note, we will have special coverage of the 4th Republican presidential debate being held in Tuscaloosa, Alabama this Wednesday. I'll be there. You can stream an hour-long edition of America Decides at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday and at 10 p.m. Eastern that night for analysis after the debate. But for now, that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.